Let's analyze the ultimate clinical case of predatory acquisition and trauma bonding. From a behavioral standpoint, Sebastian Hayes is a corporate sociopath, narcissistic enough to embezzle $3 million from the cartel and frame his innocent ex-girlfriend using a keystroke logger. But Deondre Falcone, he exhibits the terrifying traits of a Machiavellian apex predator. He doesn't just eliminate Sebastian, he engineers a scenario of absolute dependency. By offering Celeste $10 million and a fake passport, he masterfully triggers the Stockholm response. He psychologically removed her ability to say no, making the victim actively choose her own captor.
A suffocating wave of panic washed over Celeste, her fingers strangling the delicate stem of a champagne glass. Amidst the ballroom's glittering chaos, her knuckles shone bone white. Then she saw him, the architect of her ruin, sharing a laugh with the heiress who now inhabited her life. The need for escape was absolute. Turning to the silent monolith in the tuxedo beside her, she breathed. "Dance with me. My ex is here." She was utterly unaware she had just pleaded for salvation from the city's most feared shadow. The ballroom was a dizzying mosaic of silk, precious stones, and custom-made suits. To the assembled elite, this gala marked the apex of the social season. To Celeste Adams, it was a gilded cage her profession demanded she occupy. As an appraiser, she moved in the orbits of the ultra-wealthy. A familiar coldness then settled deep within her. Sebastian Hayes. He stood with an arm draped possessively around Victoria Street James, the woman he'd chosen 3 months ago, after deciding Celeste was not enough for his world. Celeste's breath caught in her throat. She watched Sebastian scan the room, a self-satisfied smirk she knew with painful intimacy playing on his lips. He was hunting for her, ready to flaunt his victory. She had to disappear. Stepping back, she collided with a form as unyielding as a marble wall. A firm hand closed around her arm, steadying her and saving her gown from the spilled champagne. "Careful," a deep voice rumbled, a sound both smooth and chillingly cold. Celeste turned, the apology dying on her lips as their eyes met. The man before her was a vision of lethal refinement. He towered at an imposing 6'3", his broad shoulders blocking her view of the entire room. Jet black hair was slicked back from a face that looked as if it were carved from stone. But it was his eyes, the exact gray of an oncoming storm that seemed to look straight through her. A fine scar sliced through his left eyebrow, lending a brutal accent to his otherwise polished features. I am so terribly sorry," Celeste stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Before he could speak, she saw him. Sebastian had spotted her. Sebastian's smirk widened as he whispered something to Victoria. They started moving toward her. A primal terror seized Celeste. She could not bear their condescension, their mocking whispers. Not here, not now, when she was so completely defenseless. Driven by raw instinct, Celeste closed the distance to the stranger. He smelled of rich cologne and something metallic, like ozone after a lightning strike. "Please dance with me," she whispered, her voice a desperate, trembling thread. "My ex is watching us." For a moment, surprise flickered in his gray eyes before they curved into a slow, predatory smile. That smile should have sent her running. "Is that so?" he purred, the sound a deep vibration in his chest. "Please," she begged, her hand grazing the lapel of his jacket. "Just one dance." Without another word, the man motioned to a passing waiter, handed off his glass, and slid an arm around her waist. The sheer power coiled in his grip sent a jolt through her. He pulled her flush against his hard frame, guiding her to the dance floor as a slow ballad began. "Follow me," he commanded softly. Celeste had no choice but to obey. He moved with a liquid grace, a predator at odds with the romantic music. He did not just dance, he owned the floor, forcing other couples to drift away, granting them a wide berth. "You're trembling," he remarked, his hand a branding iron against the bare skin of her back. "I'm terrified," Celeste confessed, too exhausted for lies. "He took my life apart, piece by piece, and now he wants to gloat." The stranger's gaze shifted past her, his eyes icing over as he assessed her approaching ex. The blonde man in the cheap suit? A choked, hysterical laugh escaped her. "That's Tom Ford, but yes, that's him." "He has the look of a coward, yea," the man stated, "and made a poor trade, leaving you for the wraith on his arm." Celeste glanced up at him, momentarily speechless at the stark compliment. "Who are you?" "A convenient solution," he replied, dipping her low just as Sebastian and Victoria closed in. "Celeste!" Sebastian's voice was intentionally loud, crafted to draw attention. "I had a feeling I'd see you here." The stranger brought her upright, his body a living bulwark between them, and fixed his gaze on Sebastian. The air around them seemed to drop several degrees. Sebastian's arrogant smile faltered beneath that cold, emotionless stare. Victoria took a half step back. "Sebastian," Celeste managed, her voice paper-thin. "I see you've found a new dance partner." Sebastian sneered, fighting to regain his composure. He eyed the stranger from head to toe. "I don't believe we've met. Sebastian Hayes, of Hayes Capital." He offered a hand. The stranger merely looked at it as though it were something filthy. "The lady's time is occupied," the stranger said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of absolute finality. It wasn't a statement. It was a decree. Sebastian let his hand drop, a dark flush creeping up his neck. "Excuse me, I was talking to my ex." "And that conversation is over," the stranger countered, his gaze never leaving Sebastian's. "Walk away, Mr. Hayes, while you still possess the ability to do so." The chilling weight of the threat was in its complete absence of emotion. Sebastian swallowed hard, his bravado crumbling to dust. He shot Celeste a look filled with a new, uncertain fear, grabbed Victoria's arm, and beat a hasty retreat into the crowd. Celeste was stunned, staring at the man who still held her. What was that? The stranger's dangerous smile returned. He let her go, but the phantom heat of his touch remained on her skin. "I was simply offering my assistance, Celeste." He knew her name. She had never said it. Before she could ask, he gently brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. "Enjoy the rest of your night. Don't waste your sorrow on a man who is already a ghost." With that enigmatic farewell, he melted back into the party, leaving Celeste profoundly shaken. Monday morning arrived with the taste of stale coffee and a deep sense of dread. Celeste sat at her desk, her eyes unfocused, gazing at a loupe and an array of antique jewelry. Sleep had been a stranger since the gala. When she closed her eyes, all she could see was a powerful hand on her back and stormy gray eyes that had looked at her like she was prey. "You look like you wrestled a ghost and lost, Adams." Celeste looked up as Sarah, her sharp-tongued colleague, dropped a file on her desk. "Just tired," Celeste lied. "Long night." "I'm sure," Sarah smirked, leaning in. "Word is you got cozy with the city's boogeyman. It's the only gossip worth hearing." Celeste frowned. "What are you on about? He was just some guy." Sarah's jaw dropped. "Celeste, please don't tell me you're that oblivious. You really have no idea who that was?" "No. Who? Some actor? A tech mogul?" Before Sarah could answer, the gallery's main doors were thrown open with force. The auction house's quiet, professional atmosphere died instantly. Through her office window, Celeste saw 4 men in dark suits enter with grim purpose. They moved with the synchronized precision of a hunting party, their gazes sweeping the room methodically. These were not bodyguards. They were predators. Arthur Caldwell, her boss, scurried from his office, fumbling with his tie. Then, a figure darkened the doorway, and the breath seized in Celeste's chest. It was him, the man from the gala. The harsh office lights made him appear even more formidable. He wore a flawless 3-piece suit that screamed of power, his dark hair styled perfectly. He moved with a placid, deliberate force, completely ignoring the sheer terror that radiated from Arthur Caldwell. "Who is that?" Celeste whispered, her gaze fixed on him. Sarah's fingernails dug into her skin. "That," she hissed, her voice shaking, "is Deondre Falcone. He leads the Falcone crime family. He owns half the port, the city's entire illegal gambling scene, and God knows what else. He's the most powerful and feared man in New York, Celeste. He is the syndicate." The oxygen seemed to vanish from the room. Deondre Falcone. The name was a dark legend whispered among the city's elite, a horror story used to scare their children, and she had thrown herself at him, insisted he dance with her. She had used a notorious crime lord as a shield against her ex. "Oh, God," Celeste breathed. She remembered his icy words to Sebastian. "Walk away while you still have the legs to do so." It hadn't been a threat, it had been a promise. "Miss Adams," Celeste jumped. Arthur Caldwell was in her doorway, his face pale and slick with sweat. One of Deondre's men stood impassively beside him. "Yes, Mr. Caldwell," Celeste said, rising on trembling legs. "Mr. Falcone is in the private viewing room," Caldwell stammered, his voice strained with fear. "He's acquired a new property and needs its art collection appraised immediately. He asked for you by name." "Me?" Celeste's voice was a faint whisper. "But I'm a junior appraiser. You handled the VIP accounts." "I tried to make that clear," Caldwell hissed, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. "He was insistent. He said he admired your audacity at the gala." "Celeste, I'm begging you. You cannot say no to this man." The walk down the lavish corridor to the VIP suite felt like the final march to the gallows. Caldwell pushed the heavy door open and then flinched away, not daring to step inside. Deondre Falcone was gazing at the Manhattan skyline through a floor-to-ceiling window. He held a glass of scotch at 10 in the morning and didn't turn as she walked in. "Lock the door." "Celeste!" he commanded. The sound of his voice sent a familiar, terrifying jolt through her. She did as she was told, the click of the lock echoing like a tomb being sealed shut. She stood transfixed in the room's dead center, her tablet a fragile shield. Deondre finally pivoted. A specter of a smile haunted his lips as his tempestuous gaze locked onto hers. "You had no conception of who I was that night," he murmured, a declaration, not an inquiry. "No, Mr. Falcone, I didn't." Celeste lifted her chin, a desperate performance of courage while her legs quaked. "If I had, I would never have." "Put your hands on me?" He cut in, his stride a single measured advance. "Made me your personal guard? Used my presence to degrade your pitiful ex-lover?" A dark flush flooded Celeste's neck. "I am deeply sorry. My actions were indefensible." Deondre stopped, his body now a breath from hers. That rich, dark fragrance of woods and power consumed her again. Do not apologize. It was the most riveting 5 minutes I've endured at those functions in a decade. You have a certain fearlessness, Celeste. I find it compelling. He drifted to a leather armchair, indicating she take its twin. I was forthright with your director. I have taken possession of a Hamptons property. Its former resident collected a great deal of European art. I need an expert to distinguish the masterpieces from the trash that must be burned. Burned? Celeste breathed, the word stealing her own breath. If it is counterfeit, it meets the flame, Deondre declared, raising a glass to his lips with absolute finality. I permit no fakes in my life, Celeste. Not in my art, and certainly not in my company. You will be at the estate tomorrow. You will serve as my sole consultant until this work is done. Mr. Falcone, Celeste started, choosing each word like a step on thin ice. My professional calendar is full. I can't just abandon my other clients. Deondre's eyes hardened, a barely perceptible shift. Instantly, the room's ambient warmth vanished. From this point forward, you have one client. You asked for my assistance on Saturday. I granted it. In my world, favors are contracts, and every marker is eventually collected. He stood, the audience concluded. He swept past her but stopped at the door, his lips brushing the air by her ear. Pack for a week, he whispered. My driver will be here at 8. The colossal iron gates of the Falcone estate peeled open like the jaws of some mechanical leviathan. The grounds occupied a forested private bluff in East Hampton, secured by 10-foot stone walls topped with watchful cameras. As the black escalade crawled forward, Celeste clutched her purse, her heart a wild, panicked rhythm in her chest. Her night had been spent researching Deondre Falcone. The information was thin, buried under a mountain of rumors and dismissed indictments. Extortion, racketeering, money laundering, and whispers of how his competition simply ceased to exist. The man she had so recklessly danced with was the undeclared king of the city's underworld. The driver, a mountain of a man named Rocco, swung her door open. Celeste's feet met the gravel drive, her gaze locked on the sprawling, Gothic revival manor. Miss Adams! A sharp voice cut through the air. A stern-faced woman in a stark black uniform was descending the stone steps. I am Mrs. Gable, the household manager. Mr. Falcone is engaged in the East Wing. My instructions are to show you to the library where the collection awaits. Celeste could only offer a mute nod, following the woman down cavernous, silent hallways of marble and dark wood. The estate's profound stillness was unnerving, feeling less like a home and more like an immaculately curated mausoleum. The library was a breathtaking spectacle, a 2-story sanctuary of books that smelled of antique paper and worn leather, its vast bay windows overlooking a turbulent sea. Paintings were everywhere, propped on easels or resting against the immense bookshelves. For the next 4 hours, she lost herself in the task, using the work as a shield against the mounting dread of her captivity. She moved between canvases, confirming a stunning, genuine Modigliani, a dubious Rembrandt, and a masterful but false Vermeer. She was studying the shadowed drama of a Caravaggio when the library doors flew open with a bang. Celeste jumped, her magnifying glass nearly slipping from her fingers. 2 of Deondre's men were hauling a third man between them. Their captive was fighting, his clothes torn, his face split by a bloody cut above his eye. They threw him onto the Persian rug without ceremony. Deondre appeared a moment later, His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was open at the throat, the sleeves rolled up to expose powerful forearms dense with intricate dark tattoos. He was death incarnate. He was the monster from the stories. Deondre's attention was a laser, seemingly unaware of Celeste, who had shrunk into the shadows behind a large globe. "Falcone, please, I swear!" The man on the carpet whimpered, his voice cracking with pure terror. Celeste clapped a hand over her own mouth, killing a scream. She knew him. It was Sebastian. Her ex-lover was on his knees in a mob boss's study, weeping, his expensive shirt smeared with his own blood. Deondre stalked toward him, his face a perfect mask, devoid of rage or any feeling at all. He pulled out a silver lighter, snapping it open and shut, the sound a sharp, metallic rhythm. "You owe me $3 million, Sebastian," Deondre stated, his voice a low, almost gentle hum. It was a calm so absolute it was more terrifying than any scream. "Money my enterprise invested with Hayes Capital for reallocation. My records show you've been wiring it to offshore accounts for a new boat and a diamond for your newest toy." The color vanished from Celeste's face. Sebastian had stolen from the Mafia? He had cheated Deondre Falcone to pay for his new life with Victoria? "I can get it back," Sebastian pleaded, scrambling away until he hit a massive leather chair. I need more time. The market shifted, my funds are tied up." The attack was a blur, a predator's strike. Deondre's arm shot out, his hand closing around Sebastian's throat, slamming his head back into the chair. The lighter stopped clicking. "Do not insult my intelligence with such pathetic lies," Deondre hissed, the sophisticated facade melting away to show the savage beneath the suit. "I know precisely where every last dollar went. You bought a new car with my money. You built a life you never earned." "Deondre, I'm begging you," Sebastian choked out, his face turning a dark purple as the grip tightened. "I'll do anything. I can work it off." "You couldn't work off a $3 million debt in 10 lifetimes, you pathetic insect," Deondre snarled. He leaned in, his voice a blade of venom. "And the beautiful irony, you threw away a woman of actual worth because you deemed her family beneath you, only to steal from a monster to pretend you were a man of substance." Celeste's world stopped turning. He was talking about her. He knew all of it. He had probably known everything about her long before she ever knew his name. With a look of pure loathing, Deondre dropped Sebastian, who crumpled to the floor, heaving for breath. Deondre drew a clean white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hands with cold, methodical precision. "Take him to the quiet room in the basement," Deondre ordered, his eyes never falling on the broken figure. "Let him consider his debt in the dark. If he doesn't have a credible plan by midnight, you can start removing his fingers." "Got it, boss." They dragged Sebastian up, his desperate begging echoing down the corridor until it was swallowed by the house. And then, once again, the library was utterly silent. For a long moment, Deondre stood without moving, his gaze fixed on the empty doorway. Then, with his back still to her, his voice sliced through the quiet. "You can come out now, Celeste." Celeste's body went rigid, the air trapped in her lungs. She emerged from the shadows, her tablet shaking in her hand. Deondre finally turned to face her. The monster of a moment ago was gone, replaced by the cool, inscrutable man she'd first met. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, his voice like smooth bourbon as he poured a measure from a crystal decanter. I was not informed Mrs. Gable had settled you in here. You're going to hurt him, she whispered, her voice a thin, fragile thing. Her hatred for Sebastian was nothing against the raw violence she had just witnessed. Deondre took a slow sip, his gray eyes pinning her in place. I am collecting on a debt, the same way I collected on ours. Are you going to kill him? He set his glass down. With a few deliberate strides, he closed the distance between them, consuming her space. The heat of his body was a physical presence. He raised a hand, his knuckles a ghost of a touch against her cold cheek. She recoiled but did not retreat. That, my dear, is entirely up to you, he murmured, his thumb tracing the sharp line of her jaw. What price would you put on your former lover's worthless life? The great library was silent, save for the sound of the Atlantic crashing on the shore far below. Celeste was caught in the vortex of Deondre Falcone's gaze, her mind reeling from his staggering proposition. What price would you put on your former lover's inconsequential life? Her voice failed her. Celeste swallowed, resisting the urge to pull away from the warm, rough hand that still cupped her cheek. I don't have $3 million, Mr. Falcone. A deep, humorless laugh rumbled in his chest as he dropped his hand, though his piercing eyes never left hers. I am well aware of your financial situation, Celeste. Your work at Caldwell and Finch is profitable, but not enough for the apartment Sebastian kept. Your money is worthless to me. What do you want, then? She shot back, a flicker of her old fire returning. Why make me name a price for him? I loathe him. He humiliated me, but I don't want him dead. Deondre turned back to the decanter, the amber liquid catching the last rays of sun as he poured. Because, my dear, Sebastian Hayes made a fatal mistake. Stealing was only his first sin. He planned to launder the cash with forged art certificates, which he meant to hide within the Caldwell and Finch archives. The blood in Celeste's veins turned to ice. What? He was going to use your credentials, Deondre said flatly, leaning back against his imposing desk. He put a keylogger on your computer 2 months before he disappeared on you. The betrayal was elegantly simple. Use her access to legitimize counterfeit art, channel the money through a shell company, and pay his debt to me. If the authorities ever connected the fraud, every piece of evidence would point to Celeste Adams, the bitter, passed-over appraiser. The room spun, and Celeste grabbed a bookshelf to steady herself. This was more than a broken heart. It was the architecture of her ruin. Sebastian had built a cell for her, content to watch her rot in prison to save his own skin. That's a lie, she whispered, but a cold certainty twisted in her gut, recognizing Sebastian's signature cowardice in the scheme. Deondre slid a silver flash drive across the desk. On this is the forensic report from his encrypted hard drives. You can see for yourself. His love was an act, Celeste. You were a means to an end, the perfect fall guy. Hot tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her stare was fixed on the drive as fear hardened into a cold, sharp fury. Why are you showing me this? Celeste demanded, her attention snapping back to the crime lord. You could just kill him with this proof. Why involve me at all? Deondre pushed off the desk, his approach slow and predatory. Because his plan entangled one of my rivals, Lorenzo Rossi, the man who supplied the forgeries Sebastian was going to use. In 3 days, Rossi is holding a private auction at his estate in Newport. a front for his organization to move illegal assets. Deondre stopped just a foot away, his cologne an overpowering scent. I need an expert, an eye that knows a fake from 50 paces, a reputation that is clean in the legitimate art world, and, most importantly, someone who has a personal stake in seeing Sebastian Hayes utterly destroyed. Celeste looked up into his chiseled face. You're offering me a job? Nod. I am offering you the role of my fiancé, Deondre corrected, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. Rossi knows I have no interest in art. If I showed up alone, it would arouse suspicion. But if I arrive with a renowned appraiser, a woman I am supposedly infatuated with, he will only see a man trying to buy his way into her affections. And if I say no? Celeste challenged, her heart pounding against her ribs. Deondre's expression became stone, the predator beneath the surface showing its teeth. Then Sebastian's story ends at the bottom of the ocean. Rossi's auction will be a success, and the authorities will find the fake appraisals Sebastian planted on the Caldwell servers. They will convict you, Celeste. He said it not as a threat, but as an unavoidable truth. The room had become a cage. If I agree, Celeste started, her voice shaking, and I help you with your scheme against Rossi, what happens to Sebastian? He lives, Deondre said, his tone flat and empty of feeling. I will take everything he owns, ruin his name, and ensure he is exiled forever. But I will spare his life. Her gaze moved from the flash drive to the deadly man before her, a quiet scholar from Connecticut, now negotiating with the devil for a man's life. Fine, Celeste agreed. I'll be your fiancé. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Deondre's face. He stepped closer, tilting her chin up to force her eyes to meet his. Excellent, he purred. Welcome to the family, Mia Cara. The next 48 hours were a dizzying blur of luxurious menace. Celeste was given the main guest suite in the Falcone compound, a room that dwarfed her apartment and featured a marble fireplace and a balcony overlooking a private beach, but the opulence was undercut by the 2 armed guards posted outside her door. She was a guest and a prisoner. On Tuesday, a team of stylists descended. Mr. Falcone's standards are precise, a woman named Madame Celine announced, holding up a breathtaking, backless Oscar de la Renta gown in midnight blue. Your appearance must convey great wealth, untouchability, and that you belong entirely to him. Standing on a platform, Celeste was draped in silks and jewels. A jeweler from Cartier, flanked by his own security, opened a steel case to reveal a spectacular sapphire and diamond necklace. The Rossi affair requires a projection of extreme power, the grim housekeeper Mrs. Gable informed her. You are to wear this all night. It is a symbol of Deondre's claim on you. Celeste stared at her reflection and saw a stranger. Her auburn hair was swept up in a severe, elegant style. Her makeup was flawless, sharpening her features and creating a dangerous spark in her green eyes. She looked every inch the mob wife. That evening, Deondre sent for her for dinner. They met in a cavernous hall lit by an enormous crystal chandelier. Deondre was seated at the head of a long table, the sleeves of his black shirt rolled up to reveal a silver Patek Philippe. As Celeste entered wearing a simple black gown, his conversation with his hulking bodyguard, Rocco, stopped cold. Deondre's eyes devoured her, a flash of raw ownership crossing his face before his mask of control returned. He stood, pulling out the chair to his right. You look stunning, he said softly as she sat. I am the bait, Celeste replied, her voice like ice as she placed her napkin in her lap. A quiet chuckle from Deondre echoed in the room as he sat back down. Rossi is a snake, but he respects the old ways. A made man's woman is off limits. With me, you are the safest person in Rhode Island. The meal itself was an exercise in controlled chaos. They ate in a silence that felt heavy with unsaid things. She found herself watching him. For a man of such legendary cruelty, he moved with a quiet elegance, showing a respect to his staff that clashed with his reputation for violence. You're analyzing me, Deondre noted, swirling the wine in his glass. I'm trying to understand you, Celeste admitted, guessing that he would respect honesty. You are a violent criminal, but you are also the only thing standing between me and a federal prison. I'm protecting an investment, Deondre corrected smoothly. Your freedom is merely a convenient byproduct. It's more than that. He froze mid-motion. He truly looked at her then, and for a split second, the iron wall of his control seemed to crack. It's foolish to trust monsters, Celeste, but it is fatal to go looking for their soul. Do not mistake me for a hero. Before she could respond, a soft chime sounded. Rocco handed a satellite phone to Deondre, whose face hardened as he listened. He ended the call and slid the phone toward her. It's for you, he said, his voice neutral. Celeste took the phone, confused. Hello? Celeste? Oh my God, I need you to help me. An absolute coldness washed over Celeste. The voice, broken and sobbing, was Victoria St. James. Victoria? Celeste breathed, her eyes darting to Deondre. He just watched her, slowly turning his wine glass. He's destroyed me, Celeste, Victoria cried over the static. Sebastian emptied my family's trust. He forged my father's signature on a wire transfer. The feds raided our home this morning. We've lost everything. A horrifying clarity descended upon Celeste. Sebastian hadn't just used Victoria, he had gutted her family's entire fortune to pay off his debts to the underworld. Victoria, I don't know what I can do to help, Celeste said, the irony stinging her. The other woman was now begging her for help. He talked about your files, Victoria sobbed. He was drunk, and he bragged that if he went down, he would take you with him for the art scam. I'm being investigated because of him, and he plans to throw you to the wolves. You have to get those documents before he frames me as his partner. Where is he? Celeste demanded, her hand clenching the phone. I don't know. He vanished 2 days ago. Celeste, please. Deondre calmly reached over, took the phone from her hand, and ended the call. He set it down by his plate. Celeste was frozen, her mind a maelstrom. You knew, she whispered to Deondre. You knew he was bankrupting her. I knew he was a desperate animal backed into a corner, Deondre replied, cutting into his steak with unnerving calm. He was a predator in search of a vessel. Victoria Street James was simply the richest one he could find. So you did nothing? His business was his own, until it threatened mine, Deondre stated, his tone devoid of heat, his gray eyes locked on hers. Sebastian Hayes is the sickness in your so-called proper world, Celeste. A man who steals with paper and hides behind lawyers. They look down on men like me who render our own verdicts. But tell me, what is worse? The man who bleeds you dry and leaves you, or the one who stops him with a single bullet? Celeste could not find a reply. The world she had so carefully built was now just a fragile shell, rotting from the inside out. From the wreckage, Deondre Falcone had risen, offering a menacing and undeniable salvation. Eat, mia cara, Deondre whispered, his eyes burning with a possessive heat. Tomorrow we drive to Newport. You will show Lorenzo Rossi exactly whose gravity you belong to now. The Newport estates were testaments to inherited power, but Lorenzo Rossi's home was less a residence than a fortress draped in wealth. As Deondre's armored Maybach climbed the drive, Celeste stared at the colossal limestone structure. Staff in crisp white uniforms opened doors for an assembly of the world's elite, from financiers to syndicate bosses. Just breathe, Celeste. Deondre's voice was a low hum next to her. She jolted, her eyes tearing away from the scene. Deondre watched her from the other side of the car's plush interior. He wore a custom Tom Ford tuxedo that made his powerful frame look both elegant and deadly. In the low light, the silver scar that cut across his brow was a brutal mark, giving his handsome face a savage edge. I am breathing, she lied, her anxious fingers tightening on her clutch. You look as though you're meeting a firing squad, not attending a gallery opening, he noted, the corner of his mouth lifting in a smirk. He reached out, his large, warm hand swallowing her trembling ones. Look at me. Celeste met his hard, gray stare. Tonight? You are not Celeste Adams, the quiet scholar from Caldwell and Finch's back office, Deondre commanded, his voice a deep, steadying weight. Tonight, you are the woman who holds the complete attention of Deondre Falcone. You are untouchable. If a man looks too long, he will lose his eyes. If he speaks to you without respect, he will lose his tongue. Do you understand? This primal ownership sent a strange warmth through her, a terrifying shield she desperately craved. I understand, she breathed. Good. Deondre slipped a hand inside his jacket and revealed a small black velvet box. He opened it. Resting on silk was an emerald-cut diamond, so large and pure it seemed to glow from within. Your left hand. After a brief pause, Celeste offered her shaking fingers. Deondre pushed the cold, heavy platinum ring into place. Its weight felt like an unbreakable chain, sinking her forever into his dangerous world. It is time, mia cara, he murmured, his lips pressing a slow, surprisingly gentle kiss against her knuckles. The Maybach came to a stop. Rocco opened her door, and Deondre stepped out first, extending a hand to lead Celeste into the sharp, salt-laced air. The moment her Oscar de la Renta dress met the crimson carpet, a storm of camera flashes exploded from the press line. Deondre did not flinch. His hand came to rest with possessive pressure on the bare skin of her lower back, a declaration for all to see as he escorted her up the sweeping marble steps. The foyer was a sensory overload of cascading orchids, the chime of crystal glasses, and the quiet hum of immense wealth changing hands. Waiters moved with trays of Dom Perignon, while a string quartet played Vivaldi. On the surface, it felt like the charity events Celeste knew, yet the atmosphere was entirely alien. The air crackled with a predatory current. These were not just rich men, they were hunters. Deondre, my friend. A loud greeting sliced through the cultivated quiet. A man in an ostentatious, silver-threaded suit approached them, arms wide. Lorenzo Rossi was shorter than Deondre, his hair slicked back, his smile sharp and empty. Lorenzo, Deondre replied, returning the pro forma embrace. An excellent party. You always host the best gatherings for the East Coast's finest. Rossi beamed before his gaze landed on Celeste. His eyes went wide, his stare a physical touch that traveled from her shoulders to the massive Cartier sapphire on her neck, finally locking on her face. And who is this stunning creature? You've been keeping secrets, Deondre. Deondre's hand on Celeste's waist tightened slightly, a quiet warning that made Rossi take a small step back. Let me introduce my fiancée, Celeste Adams, Deondre announced, his tone like silk with a blade hidden beneath. Celeste, our host, Lorenzo Rossi. Fiancé? Rossi repeated, his smooth facade faltering for a second. He recovered quickly, grabbing Celeste's hand to press a damp kiss to it. An honor, Ms. Adams, a true honor. I wasn't aware the Falcone empire was ready to grow. We prefer our privacy, Celeste replied, her own voice taking on an aristocratic chill that surprised her. But Deondre was insistent that I see your collection. He mentioned your skill for unique procurements. Rossi's smile strained. I have a certain eye. In fact, the main gallery is open. I have a piece tonight that will make the experts in Paris weep. A lost Raphael sketch. Celeste felt Deondre's thumb draw a deliberate line along her spine. This was it. The trap was laid. A Raphael? Celeste lifted a perfect brow, her voice edged with scholarly doubt. That's strange, considering the Uffizi fire of 1762 consumed most of his unrecorded drawings. A real piece appearing now would be like finding a ghost. A nerve jumped in Rossi's jaw. My authenticators are the best, I assure you. We shall see, Deondre said softly, guiding Celeste around the visibly unnerved man. Lead the way, Lorenzo. They passed into a secure, temperature-controlled room. In the center, under a single, harsh spotlight, was a small, framed rendering of the Madonna and Child. A small group of wealthy buyers was already gathered. Celeste neared the artwork, taking a small jeweler's loupe from her purse. The room descended into a heavy hush as she leaned in. Rossi watched from the side, a fresh layer of sweat on his brow. She studied the paper, the ink, the very soul of the strokes. It was a brilliant fake, a masterpiece of deceit. But for someone whose life was Renaissance art, the mistakes were obvious. The paper was aged with tea, a rookie mistake, and the ink was missing the iron rust that 500 years would create. It was the exact forgery Sebastian had planned for her to authenticate. Celeste pulled the loupe back. Her gaze met Deondre's. He gave a tiny, nearly invisible nod. Ruin him. Just as Celeste readied herself to demolish Rossi's prize, the scene exploded at the gallery entrance. Get off me! I need to see Lorenzo. Rossi, please! The crowd split as Rossi's security dragged a wild, unkempt man forward. His suit was ripped, his face was bruised, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Celeste's breath caught. It was Sebastian. What is this garbage? Lorenzo Rossi thundered, his face turning purple as his men forced Sebastian across the perfect floor. Who let this trash into my home? He slipped past security with the catering service, Mr. Rossi, a guard grunted, twisting Sebastian's arm. Said he had critical information about the offshore funds. Sebastian was gasping for air, his eyes darting around the room of killers and magnates like a cornered prey. The arrogant Wall Street shark who left Celeste 3 months ago was gone, replaced by a shaking, broken man. Rossi, you have to listen, Sebastian begged, his voice cracking. The SEC has locked Hayes Capital. They've taken everything. I can't make good on payment for the piece. A wave of shocked whispers swept the room. In their world, to mention federal agents was to sign your own death warrant. Rossi looked as if he might kill Sebastian right there. You foolish, prideful dog, Rossi hissed, moving toward him. "You brought the Federals to my house?" "I have the authentication," Sebastian yelled, his last desperate play to save his skin. "The papers from Caldwell and Finch. Celeste Adams signed her name on them. They're proof the Raphael is real. You can sell it, clean the money, and we both get out of this." Celeste was a silent statue beside Deondre. Sebastian, in his terror, hadn't even seen her. He actually thought his vile plan could work. He actually thought he had perfectly arranged her destruction. Deondre was motionless. He simply adjusted his position, his formidable build a living barricade blocking the sole means of escape. He studied Sebastian the way a predator eyes its crippled prey. "Miss Adams will not be assessing any art for you, Sebastian." Celeste's voice sliced through the tension, sharp as broken crystal. It was unnervingly steady, laced with a frigid command she hadn't known she could wield. Sebastian's head whipped toward her, his expression of disbelief absolute as he finally saw her. He took in the entire picture, the couture dress, the brilliant Cartier gems, and the imposing ring on her fourth finger. His eyes then darted to the man whose hand rested possessively at her waist. Deondre Falcone. The color vanished from Sebastian's face, his legs gave out, and he would have crumpled to the floor if the guards hadn't seized him. "Celeste," Sebastian rasped, his tone a fractured mix of utter confusion and raw fear. "What? What is the meaning of this? With him?" "She is admiring the collection," Deondre supplied for her, his voice a low, threatening vibration that filled the silent gallery. "Is that not correct, my love?" Deondre looked down at her, the affectionate term, a jarring contrast to the predatory focus that never left Sebastian. "Yes," Celeste confirmed, shifting her gaze to Lorenzo Rossi, who was now slick with sweat. "Mr. Rossi, your colleague is claiming I validated this work, and I can assure you no such error occurred. If it had, my immediate termination for gross incompetence would be justified." Rossi stammered, "Incompetence," scrambling to regain some semblance of authority. "This canvas is a certified masterwork." "It is a certified fabrication," Celeste countered, her deliberate steps toward the painting capturing every gaze. The affluent guests, sensing conflict, leaned in expectantly. The Madonna's robes were rendered by a right-handed painter. Raphael was famously a southpaw. The iron gall ink lacks any paper corrosion, a chemical impossibility for a 5-century-old document. Finally, the paper itself holds a synthetic agent not developed until 1923. She addressed the gathering with the gravitas of a master auctioneer concluding a sale. "This is not some lost Raphael. It is a modern forgery, probably created in a Tuscan basement inside the last 5 years. Its market value is roughly $300, mostly for the vintage frame." A thick silence blanketed the gallery. By demolishing the painting's authenticity, Celeste hadn't just spoiled Rossi's night. She had unmasked him as a fraud before his entire criminal enterprise. Rossi's face became a pale mask. He scanned the crowd, only to be met by the icy glares of the men he had just tried to swindle. "She's lying!" Sebastian screamed, thrashing against the men holding him. "It's retribution because I broke things off with her." Deondre moved forward, his stride measured, but closing the gap with startling speed. The guards let Sebastian go, and he stumbled. Deondre grabbed him by his tattered lapels, hauling him upright. "She is doing this," Deondre hissed in a low voice, audible only to Sebastian and Celeste, "because she is a Falcone now. and the Falcone name is not to be defiled by vermin. Deondre shoved Sebastian away. He struck a marble pillar and slid to the ground, sobbing hysterically. Deondre pivoted to Rossi, calmly straightening his cuffs. Lorenzo, it seems your evaluation methods are lacking, and you've partnered with a con man who defrauded my family of $3 million. Deondre, I swear on my mother's grave, I was ignorant of this treachery, Rossi pleaded, backing away. He approached me with an inside connection and swore the provenance was airtight. You have profoundly misread the room, Deondre said, his voice like ice. He offered Celeste his arm. Our transaction is complete. I require my $3 million, plus a significant penalty for this. Complication transferred to my account by sunrise. If the funds are not there, Lorenzo, I will be back, and my fiancé will not be with me. The unspoken violence hung heavy in the air. Celeste joined Deondre, slipping her arm through his. She refused to look at Sebastian as they passed, even as his agonized cries echoed off the stone. She held the regal bearing of a Mafia matriarch until the doors of the armored car sealed them inside. Once the vehicle was in motion, her rigid composure finally shattered. Celeste sank into the plush leather seat, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block out the image of Sebastian on his knees in humiliation. Drink this, Deondre said, his tone surprisingly soft. She opened her eyes to see him holding a heavy crystal tumbler of amber liquor from the car's built-in bar. She took it with trembling fingers, downing a deep gulp. The spirit's warmth burned a path through her, loosening the icy knot of fear in her stomach. You were flawless, Deondre said, his voice holding an unfamiliar gentleness. He was no longer looking at her as a recent acquisition. He was watching her with deep, unmistakable admiration. You took down Rossi's entire operation without a weapon. You utterly destroyed Sebastian. He has no power over you anymore, Celeste. Celeste stared at the massive jewel still encircling her finger. Doesn't he? She whispered. She had survived the night. Her name was safe. But meeting Deondre Falcone's turbulent gaze, she faced a shocking new truth. She had no desire to take off his ring. Sunlight streamed into the master bedroom, falling upon a Louis Vuitton bag lying on Celeste's bed. On the vanity, a Cartier sapphire necklace and an enormous diamond ring sparkled with a cold, mocking light. The mission was over. Lorenzo Rossi was financially ruined. Sebastian's future was a wasteland. Her part was played. She was free to go back to her tiny apartment in Queens, to her scholarly pursuits. So why did the idea of leaving feel like a vast, crushing emptiness opening up inside her? A sharp rap on the door broke her train of thought. Mrs. Gable appeared, flanked by 2 armed men. Mr. Falcone would like you to join him for breakfast in the sunroom, the housekeeper stated, her eyes lingering on the packed luggage. I need a driver, Celeste replied, her voice barely audible as she smoothed her skirt. My contract with Mr. Falcone ended last evening. Mrs. Gable's placid expression didn't shift. The guards remained like stone statues. I'm sorry, but that is not an option, Miss Adams. Mr. Falcone was very clear. You are not to leave the grounds of this estate. Celeste's heart started to pound against her ribs. Her brief illusion of freedom had just been turned to ash. I'm not your prisoner. You are his guest, the woman corrected, her polite tone carrying a clear undertone of threat. A flash of white-hot fury finally burned through Celeste's fear. Sweeping past the housekeeper, she strode down the long hall, Bypassing the sunroom completely, she threw open the heavy doors to Deondre's office without knocking. He was seated behind a huge walnut desk, looking over financial reports. He took in her rage with a maddening serenity and dismissed his men with a flick of his hand. The doors clicked shut, sealing them in. "You lied to me," Celeste seethed, slamming her hands on his desk and leaning over it. "You gave me your word I'd be free." Deondre tilted his chair back, his gray eyes impossible to read. "I gave you my word you'd be free from federal prosecution. There's a world of difference." "I'm going home, Deondre." "You don't have a home to go to," he said with finality. Celeste went still. "What are you talking about?" Deondre moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. His signature fragrance of oud and raw power filled the air. "A trapped animal always bites," he said. "After we left Rossi's, Sebastian called the FBI. He offered them Rossi and the faked Caldwell and Finch documents for full immunity. By 6 a.m., federal agents were executing a warrant at your auction house." All color drained from her face. "But Arthur Caldwell can prove I'm innocent." Deondre just slid a contract onto the desk. "Mr. Caldwell is no longer in charge. I bought the firm at 4 this morning. My IT team wiped every file connected to Sebastian's forgeries before the raid began. Their agents found nothing that could connect you to any stolen art. Your name is spotless." Celeste's mind reeled, struggling to absorb the information. He had acquired and gutted an entire company in a single night just to erase her digital trail. "Why?" She breathed, her eyes blurring with tears. "You already had your victory. You had your money. Why go to these lengths for me?" In that moment, the crime lord's controlled facade finally broke, revealing the raw, possessive predator beneath. Deondre yanked her hard by the hips, pulling her flush against him. "Because you had my ring on your finger," he growled, his voice a dark rumble. "Because you stood in a room full of murderers and bent them to your will with your mind. Because you belong to me, Celeste, and I protect what belongs to me." She shot back. "I am not your property," even as her hands found purchase on his shoulders. "You are," he murmured, his lips a breath away from hers. "That quiet little life you had, it's gone. I torched it myself to keep you out of a federal prison. The only refuge you have left is right here with me." Celeste's breath hitched. Every sane impulse screamed at her to run from this dangerous, controlling man. But in his intense eyes, she didn't see a monster. She saw the only one who had ever truly seen her. With a soft gasp of surrender, Celeste brought her mouth to his. Deondre let out a deep, possessive groan, lifting her into him as he claimed her lips. The kiss was a brutal collision of terror and impulse, a volatile alchemy that incinerated every thought. He pinned her to the desk, fingers tangling in her hair, erasing the FBI, Sebastian, and her own name from existence. When he pulled back, air burned their lungs. His forehead rested on hers, his gaze a storm of fierce ownership. "You're not leaving," he stated, the command laced with a raw, desperate need. Celeste studied the man who had demolished her world only to rebuild it. That choice was never mine, was it? A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. "No, my love, it never was." Her transformation from a mere piece on the board to the queen was a violent, dizzying storm. In the month that followed, Celeste's reality was entirely rewritten. She abandoned her drab office for good, taking command as the new acquisitions director for Caldwell and Finch from a secure suite in Manhattan's Falcone Tower. By day, she directed the flow of priceless artifacts. By night, she was lost in the fever of Deondre Falcone. She had become the underworld monarch she once feared. And, to her shock, she was magnificent at it. The entire organization bowed to her. The story of how she disarmed Lorenzo Rossi without a single weapon had spread like a dark legend. Her presence in a room now commanded silence, not just as Deondre's woman, but as a sovereign force. It was a late November Tuesday when the last ghost of her old life was finally laid to rest. Celeste was coiled on Deondre's penthouse sofa, savoring a Bordeaux while scanning a Sotheby's catalog. A chime announced the private elevator, and Deondre strode in. He looked tired, yet still dangerously handsome as he shed his coat. He drew near, pressed a kiss to her temple, and laid a heavy manila envelope on the coffee table. "It's done," Deondre announced, turning toward the bar to pour a drink. Celeste set down her catalog, her eyes fixed on the envelope and its foregone conclusion. The trial concluded with a plea deal. Sebastian Hayes pleaded guilty to 3 counts of wire fraud and 2 of embezzlement, landing him a 15-year sentence at Allenwood Federal. It was a steep price, fitting the magnitude of his crime. As Celeste released a deep, shuddering breath, a final name surfaced. And Rossi? Rossi suffered a sudden, terminal cardiac arrest on his yacht 3 weeks ago, Deondre said, his voice flat and cold. His impenetrable gray eyes found hers. A terrible loss for the sport of sailing. Celeste heard the words he didn't say. In this new world, the grim mechanics of power were truths best left unspoken. Deondre rejoined her on the sofa, his hand covering hers, where the massive Cartier diamond rested. "Sebastian is behind bars. Rossi is gone." The federal investigation into Caldwell and Finch is over. Deondre's thumb traced the line of her knuckles. "Every single threat is gone, Celeste." Her heart began to pound. "What is this, then?" He produced a slim leather passport case, setting it next to the envelope. "That is a first-class ticket to anywhere you desire, a new identity, and an untraceable account holding $10 million, Deondre said, his voice soft. The possessiveness was gone, replaced by a stark, unguarded vulnerability. "A despicable man dragged you into this life. I vowed to keep you safe, and I have. You are completely free now, Celeste. You can walk out that door and never look back." Celeste stared at the passport, the very document of escape she once prayed for. It represented a quiet, normal life. Her gaze drifted from the case to Deondre. He watched her, his entire body tense, as if bracing for a physical strike. The man who ruled an empire was now a supplicant to her judgment. "You're giving me a way out," she whispered. "I'm giving you a choice," he corrected. "But understand this," he added, his voice a deep, solemn vow. "If you stay, there is no escape. You are mine until my last day. You will inherit my name, my wars, and my darkness." Celeste looked at the ring, the symbol of her bond to him. She weighed a life of quiet isolation against the man before her, a menace to the world, but to her an absolute fortress. He hadn't just shattered her cage, he had built a throne from the bars. In one fluid final movement, Celeste reached out, her fingers gliding past the passport's promise of an empty piece. She raised her wine, took a slow sip, and leaned in to kiss a faint scar on his jaw. "Deondre," she murmured, canceled the flight. "Commercial is always so crowded," she whispered against his jawline. A raw, broken sound tore from Deondre's throat. The coffee table was sent crashing aside as he hauled her onto his lap, the passport fluttering to the carpet, an artifact of a life rejected. His kiss was no longer a question, but a savage, triumphant conquest, a king claiming his throne. The ghost of Celeste Adams was gone, replaced by a woman who had stared into the abyss and found it beautiful. Later, Celeste stands on a Falcone estate balcony, the sea air whipping her hair, overlooking the gates of her gorgeous, violent kingdom. She felt the cool weight of the diamond, its light a brilliant counterpoint to the dark, churning waves. The timid woman from Queens had been burned away in a crucible of betrayal, emerging as a creature of immense power. She hadn't just survived in the lion's den. She had tamed its brutal master. When Deondre's strong, warm hands settled on her waist, pulling her back against his chest, Celeste melted into his embrace. The syndicate's reach was a vast, cruel shadow, but as she surveyed her dark domain, she knew she would never again be afraid of the night.